All right, we're going to continue our discussion about the Cold War, and we're going to move to the east. So in this section, the communists take power in China. Communists versus nationalists. A bitter civil war was raging between nationalists and communists when the Japanese invaded China in 1937, just before the beginning of World War II. During World War II, both groups temporarily united to fight the common enemy, the Japanese. World War II in China. Under their leader, Mao Zedong, the communists had a stronghold in northwestern China and strong support among the peasants. From there, they mobilized peasants for a guerrilla war against the Japanese in the northeast. Thanks to their efforts to promote literacy and improve food production, the communists won the peasants' loyalty. By 1945, the communists controlled much of northern China. Meanwhile, the nationalist forces under Zheng Jieshi, also sometimes pronounced Zhang Chai-chek, dominated southwestern China. Protected from the Japanese by rugged mountain ranges, Zhang gathered an army of 2.5 million men. From 1942 to 1945, the United States sent the nationalists at least $1.5 billion in aid to fight the Japanese. Instead of benefiting the army, however, these supplies and monies often ended up in the hands of a few corrupt officers. Zhang's army actually fought few battles against the Japanese. After the Japanese surrendered, the nationalists and the communists resumed fighting, and you can imagine who has the support of the majority of the people at this point. Civil War resumes. The renewed Civil War lasted from 1946 to 1949. At first, the nationalists had the advantage. Their army outnumbered the Communist Army by as much as 3-1, and the United States continued its support by providing nearly $2 billion in aid. The nationalist forces, however, didn't win popular support of the Chinese people. With China's economy collapsing, thousands of nationalist soldiers deserted to the communists. In spring of 1949, China's major cities fell to the communists. Mao's troops were also enthusiastic about his promise to return land to the peasants. The remnants of Zhang's shattered army fled south. In October 1949, Mao Zedong gained control of the country. He proclaimed it the People's Republic of China. Zhang and other nationalist leaders retreated to the island of Taiwan, which Westerners called Formosa. Mao Zedong's victory fueled U.S. anti-communist feelings. These feelings only grew after the Chinese and Soviets, both communist, signed a treaty of friendship in 1950. So now you had the Soviet Union and China both working together and both communist. Many people in the United States viewed the takeover of China as another step in a communist campaign to conquer the world. The two Chinas affect the Cold War. China had split into two nations. One was the island of Taiwan, or nationalist China, with an area of only 13,000 square miles. The mainland, or the People's Republic of China, had an area of more than 3.5 million square miles. The existence of the two Chinas and the conflicting international loyalties they inspired intensifies the Cold War. The superpowers react. After Zheng Jieshi fled to Taiwan, the United States helped him set up a nationalist government on that small island. It was called the Republic of China. The Soviets gave financial, military, and technical aid to communist China. In addition, the Chinese and the Soviets pledged to come to each other's defense if either was attacked. The United States tried to halt Soviet expansion in Asia. For example, when Soviet forces occupied the northern half of Korea after World War II and set up a communist government, the United States intervened and supported a separate state in the south. China expands under communists. In the early years of Mao Zedong's reign, Chinese troops expanded into Tibet, India, and southern or inner Mongolia. Northern or outer Mongolia, which bordered the Soviet Union, remained in the Soviet sphere. In a brutal assault in 1950 and 1951, China took control of Tibet. The Chinese promised autonomy to the Tibetans, who followed their religious leader, the Dalai Lama. When China's control over Tibet tightened in the late 1950s, the Dalai Lama fled to India. India welcomed many Tibetan refugees, and after a failed revolt in Tibet in 1959. As a result, resentment between India and China grew. In 1962, they clashed briefly over the two countries' unclear border. The fighting stopped, but resentment continued. The Great Leap Forward. To expand the success of the first 5-year plan, Mao proclaimed the Great Leap Forward in early 1958. This plan called for large collective farms, or communes. By the end of 1958, about 26,000 communes had been created. The average commune sprawled over 15,000 acres and supported over 25,000 people. In the strictly controlled life of the communes, peasants worked the land together. They ate in communal dining rooms, slept in communal dormitories, and raised children in communal nurseries. And they owned nothing. The peasants had no incentive to work hard, when only the state profited from their labor. The Great Leap Forward was a giant step backward. Poor planning and inefficient backyard or home industries hampered growth. The program was ended in 1961 after crop failures caused a famine that killed about 20 million people. New policies and Mao's response. China was facing external problems as well as internal ones in the late 1950s. The spirit of cooperation that had bound the Soviet Union and China began to fade. Each sought to lead the worldwide communist movement. As they also shared the longest border in the world, they faced numerous territorial disputes. After the failure of the Great Leap Forward and the split with the Soviet Union, Mao reduced his role in government. Other leaders moved away from Mao's strict socialist ideas. For example, farm families could live in their own homes and could sell crops they grew on small private plots. Factory workers could compete for wage increases and promotions. Mao thought China's new economic policies, however, weakened the communist goal of social equality. He was determined to revive the revolution. In 1966, he urged China's young people to learn revolution by making revolution. Millions of high school and college students responded. They left their classrooms and formed militia units called Red Guards. The Cultural Revolution. The Red Guards led a major uprising known as the Cultural Revolution. Its goal was to establish a society of peasants and workers in which all were equal. The new hero was the peasant who worked with his herds. The life of the mind, intellectual and artistic activity, was considered useless and dangerous. To stamp out this threat, the Red Guards shut down colleges and schools. They targeted anyone who resisted the regime. Intellectuals had to purify themselves by doing hard labor in remote villages. Thousands were executed or imprisoned. Chaos threatened farm production and closed down factories. Civil war seemed possible. By 1968, even Mao admitted that the Cultural Revolution had to stop. The army was ordered to put down the Red Guards. Zhu Enlai, Chinese Communist Party founder and premier since 1949, began to restore order. While China was struggling to become stable, the Cold War continued to rage. 2 full-square wars were fought in Korea and in Vietnam, and we'll explore these in our next discussion.